Hello. So we are going to analyze the demand for money now. In general, all the topics that are left for us are separated into two parts. One of them is linked with the demand for money, and the other one is linked with the supply of money. So we start with the demand as in general, this is something that interests us way more and is much more complicated to understand. As you remember, we talked about the functions of money, and we said that there are four of them. And we also finished last week with a statement that the first model of a demand for money was not okay because it was not linked with a particular function of money. And so what we are going to do when aiming to find out the demand for money in the economy, we are going to separate different demands for money depending on the functions the money perform. And we start with the most important one, the major function of money. This is to ease in the exchange or to help for transactions. We are going to call this transactions demand for money, though in all the cases today that I'm going to say just demand for money, I'm going to mean transactions demand for money in particular. So this first video is gonna be about the initial Baumol's model for the demand for money. And in the second video, it's gonna be more about the cases and different adjustments of the model. So remember what we said last week when we talked about different functions of money. We said that transaction is the initial need for money, and both individuals and firms, they hold money aiming to save on time and so to save on costs when making transactions. So that's the general idea. Why do we have money instead of having bonds? So some of the background before going to discuss the particular model. First of all, we say that transactions demand for money is due to the transactions motive. That's again repeats what I said, that this is linked with the means of payment function of money. So we're gonna say that people need money only because they need to make transactions, and there should be no other motives, or there should be no other needs for the keeping money. The first one, let's say at least one of the first economists which started to talk about demand for money was Keynes, and his contribution is discussable. First of all, Keynes did not develop the entire theory. There are many cases under discussed there, so which means that we need to have adjustments and we need to exploit the theory much more. In Keynes' model, also what he meant, or the way he thought that transactions demand for money depends linearly on current income, and interest rate is not important. Saying that I see here two shortages. One is that interest rate plays an important role in the decision to keep money in cash or to buy some financial asset. And that's probably the only reason why financial assets are attractive, because they earn interest. And the second thing is that demand for money, which is linked with all our expenditure, is not purely so dependent on, or linearly dependent on current income. as we may have some savings which we spend in particular time, as we may be willing to save for the future, and so we are not going to spend our current income or total current income at the moment. And so this relationship is not that linear, or should not be that linear. The model we are going to discuss here is Baumel's inventory model, and probably it represents the actual economy much better and helps us to understand the transactions demand for money better. So in Baumel's inventory model, again, there are some assumptions that in general people has to choose between two assets, money and bonds. And here I wanted to remind that bonds, when we say bonds, we refer to all the other possible financial assets, which is not cash, though we just have one word to name it. The difference between those two choices, between those two assets, is function of mean of payments, whether we perform it or not. And so as all the payments are made in money, so bonds has no possibility to make a transaction. And that's its shortage. On one hand, it earns interest. On the other hand, you cannot use it for making transactions. Baumol thinks that in his model there's no uncertainty, so we say that the returns on bonds is known in advance. So in general, we know in advance the earnings of the interest that bonds can earn, and so there's no uncertainty in making the decision. And also all the funds that are necessary to meet the expenditure is already possessed. So we are not concerned in whether people work or not and how do they get income and how do they make those decisions about earning income. We just say they have it. And the main concern of the model is how people decide how much cash to have when having a particular income. Talking now about the models or peculiarities of a model is the assumption that there are transfer costs between money and bonds. So on one hand, it is attractive to hold bonds because they earn interest. On the other hand, it's not that attractive because you cannot make the transactions. And each time you need to make a transaction, you actually need to withdraw bonds or withdraw money out of bonds, so to make an exchange between bonds and money. And all these transactions are costly. So there are mainly two types of costs linked with that, which we are going to call brokerage costs, which is fixed costs, B0, and variable costs, B1. Variable cost would depend with the amount withdrawn, and fixed cost is linked with the number of withdrawals we do. I want to pay your attention here that those brokerage costs are not necessarily only monetary costs. That is, different intermediation payments that we ought to pay to financial intermediary, but it's also timing, also efforts we need to do to make in order to withdraw money. And even though today, or in recent times, when we can do many payments and transactions just online, it's still, you need to have computer, you need to know how to do this, you need to use your time for doing that. And so there are always some costs associated with any financial action or transaction we do. Also, we assume that individuals are going to cash all the bonds through the period. So at the end, there's nothing left. Now a bit more of assumptions maybe. So we say that individual starts with income Y and spends it evenly during the period. Now, if you look at the graph, this is what you see. Imagine that time is 1 month, and this is something that we are concerned about. And so, in the first day of the month, we get salary, and we spend it. So at the end of the month, we have nothing left. Our expenditure is the same each day. So we divide our income in even parts for each day, and we spend it evenly. So we can say that all or average income we have during a month is 1/2 of Y, or 1/2 of total income. Also, on average, each day we have half of Y. All that is divided into two parts, whether we have it in cash or money, and whether we have it in bonds. So we can say that amount of money and amount of bonds, their sum should be equal to half of the total income. Now the amount of bonds is withdrawn in evenly during the period, and this withdrawn amount is spent evenly again during the period. So let's say again that if we have a month, we have 4 weeks there. So on Monday we withdraw the money, how much we're gonna need during the week. We spend it evenly for each day. So on Sunday we have nothing left. Monday we withdraw again and we spend it evenly during the week. As remember the first assumption that people spend the same amount each day. So withdrawals for each week are also the same. On average, as withdrawing means cashing the money or having cash. So we can say that on average per month, each day a person has the amount of money which is equal to half of the amount withdrawn. Each day, on average per month, each day a person has amount of money or cash which is equal to the half of the amount withdrawn. So, on average, the amount of bonds people held over the period is equal to the half of income minus half of the amount withdrawn. Remember, half of income, this is the average income, and half of the amount withdrawn, this is how much money in cash people keep. So the rest is kept in bonds. How many times people are going to withdraw money? Because now what is important when we think about the demand for money, which is half of the amount withdrawn, so how much money people withdraw during one time? And this is linked with the amount of withdrawals during the period, during the month. As people would need to withdraw equal amounts so that they could withdraw all their income. As withdrawing is costly, we can write the cost. Remember, there are fixed costs and variable cost. Fixed cost depends only on we accurate as a fixed amount each time we withdraw money, and variable cost is linked with the amount of the value of money we withdraw, and so also with the number of withdrawals. Also, there are other types of costs. This is the interest that we do not earn if we keep money instead of bonds. So it's gonna be linked with the interest rate on bonds and the quantity of money we do have. So we can see the total opportunity costs or total cost of making those transactions is equal to the cost of withdrawing and also interest that we do not earn. We can sum them up, and also here we have some simplifications of the equation. So if a person is rational, or this is something that we actually assume without much of questioning in economics, so if a person is rational when thinking about how much money to withdraw each time, how much money to have in cash, and etc., we need to think about minimization of costs. So what shall we do in order to have as low a cost as possible? So now we have this problem of cost minimization, which means we have a cost function and we need to find its minimum value. For doing that, as usually, we need to find the derivative of costs in terms of withdrawn amount and make it equal to 0 and solve for W. And here is the answer, which says that the amount withdrawn would be linked with a fixed brokerage costs, income, and interest on bonds. As amount of money is directly linked with the withdrawing, we know it's exactly half of the amount withdrawn. So out of that, we can write transactions demand for money function, which would have a form of Cobb-Douglas function. So we have factors which affects the transactions demand for money, and we have their elasticities or effects, which says to us the transactions demand for money depends on the fixed brokerage costs, on income and interest rate. The question which interests us is not only about what factors affect demand for money, but also what is their importance or how sensitive the demand for money is. So when income changes, what change of demand for money we could expect. So what interests us is elasticity. Okay, but before talking about that, there is one more adjustment for this initial demand for money function, is its conversion from real money demand into nominal money demand, which nominal demand for money has a P or price variable. The real money demand function doesn't have it. So for doing that, we introduce prices for the brokerage transactions, and that's where price element comes from. So when I talked about effects or sensitivities, I actually talk about elasticity. Do you remember this word? Do you remember this term and what does it mean? Elasticity shows the linkage between two variables. And so we can talk about the demand for money and elasticity in respect to interest rate, income, and price. And from initial model, the estimated elasticity of a demand for money to interest rate is 1 second, as well as elasticity of money demand to income is 1 second, which means they are very similar. First of all, of the changes of money demand due to changes of interest rates and income should be very similar. Real money demand does not depend on price level. That's why elasticity is equal to 0. While nominal demand for money, it depends a lot on price level, as it is one of its components, and that's why elasticity is 1. So we stop here, as now we have the initial model. And in the next video, we are going to discuss those different cases in the transactions demand for money.